So again, for anyone that just joined us, my name is Juan Jimenez, and I'm here with my colleague Julian and Steven, and we form the prevention team here at Phoenix Health. We're located here in San Fernando Valley in Lakeview Terrace. I wish I could tell you, hey, we'll give you guys a tour of the facility, but unfortunately, we're still going through hopefully the last phase of these last shutdowns and the pandemic spiking and all this stuff. So hopefully that's over. I mean, one of these days we give you a complete tour of facility. Another question that we asked, do you know the difference between state laws and federal regulation on cannabis? So it's kind of like hampers. Some people say yes, some people said no, and just a little bit. And this is an interesting question because the legality of it is really confusing in some ways. You have some states that are open to the recreational use and some of them don't. But even the ones that give permission, like for example, the Proposition 64 that was passed in California, under federal guidance, it's still unlawful to carry or even the possession and usage of recreational marijuana, right, Julian?
Yeah. Steve is going to go a little bit in depth about that towards the end of our presentation. He has a lot of really good information. I
Yeah.
think that we can go ahead and jump right into the main content of our slides now.
Okay, so a quick outline. We're going to talk about what is marijuana, a little bit on brain development, different ways to consume, the health of it, health effects, a little bit as a gateway drug, and the Proposition 64 that Steve is going to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
So, without further ado, go ahead, Julian. Introduce the topic.
Thanks, Juan. So marijuana, what is it? Well, first and foremost, it's a plant. The main psychoactive or mind-altering chemical in marijuana, which is responsible for the intoxicating effects, is delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. It's a chemical that is this resin. It looks like sort of like salt, kind of like powder. It's that substance. So that's the THC. The chemical is found primarily in the resin produced by the leaves and buds of the female cannabis plant. So cannabis is one type of plant, and there is a male and female plant. The male is hemp, the female is marijuana. Um, I think we can go on to the next slide, Juan, so that we could talk a little bit about CBD. So another question that we get quite often is what is actually CBD? So CBD is found in marijuana and hemp. It's found in both. Hemp is the male plant of the marijuana species, and typically it has no THC. So there's no THC in hemp. CBD is similar in chemical structure to THC, however, it lacks a component to make CBD psychoactive. Um, However, CBD does interact with the body in other ways. Some studies suggest that it may decrease overall inflammation in the body and possibly help with stress. But most of those studies, they have a lot of conflicting information. There will be one study that says that it definitely does do it. There will be another study that says it definitely doesn't do anything. And there's a lot of conflicting information out there. There also another thing that I'd like to make everyone aware of is that supplements, like food supplements, like vitamins and things like that, aren't actually regulated by the FDA. So a CBD supplement is not regulated by the FDA. So it can say 100% CBD, but it could actually just be grapeseed oil or something like that. And it all really depends on the efficacy of whatever company that you're getting it from. Whatever company you're getting that product from, it'll be regulated by them. It's not actually regulated by anyone else. So that's just really briefly on what THC and what CBD actually are. Juan, you could go
Because
on
they
to the
still,
next slide.
that's because they still
Yeah.
use the nutritional supplement guidelines, the little loophole, right? Correct, Julian?
Yeah, that happened in the 90s. There was a commercial with I think Mel Gibson. If you want to know more about that act, there's a really great episode of Last Week Tonight that goes into explaining what supplement laws there are and why how it got lobbied to become illegal to actually like monitor that. So if you guys want to look into that, you can look into it. It's called Last Week Tonight. It'll be on YouTube, and you could just Google Last Week Tonight supplements or vitamins, and it'll be there. It'll go in depth. You could go to the next slide, Juan. So this chart, this graph shows the average
23
THC.
participants.
It shows, I'm gonna go ahead and mute everyone. So this shows the average THC and CBD levels in recreational cannabis, meaning that there are some THC levels that are much higher and there are some CBD levels that are much lower in the cannabis that was tested by the FBI. However, this is the average levels going from about 1960 to 2018. Sorry. So the increase shows that cannabis has gone from 1 to 18%, meaning that it's 18 times more powerful or 1,800% more powerful. That means that the actual psychoactive chemical is dramatically high. Its rates of concentration have dramatically increased, and that has to do with growing techniques. That has to do with where it's being planted, what kind of sun, and all those things factor into that. In concentrated forms, it can be as high as 30 or 40%. I've also seen, because I worked residential, I've also confiscated and seen other like marijuana products, and I've seen the concentrates that say something anywhere from like 35 to 45, 50, 60%. And a lot of those products, they can say 50, 60, 70%. They can say whatever they want. And the thing is that because they're not actually regulated by the FDA, there's no certifying body that certifies what does or doesn't go into them. There's not really anything that can prove or disprove what is in them besides actually getting a lab test to test every single product that is made, as well as all the equipment that goes into making them. So pretty much, let's say I have a marijuana plant and I could put it in a bag and write 100% marijuana on it, and then or 100% THC, and then sell it. There's not actually any guidelines that are preventing me from selling it as 100% THC and marketing it that way. So yes, there are higher and lower levels. However, it seems to be that right now, or in 2018, the highest was about 18%. The highest average was about 18%, and it probably has gone up a bit over that since then. Juan, you could go on to the next slide. So now that we understand what CBD and what THC are, now that we understand that the levels have been increasing, we're going to talk about human developmental stages for a little bit. We're going to focus on these two because this seems to be when experimentation is the highest. So in middle childhood, the brain reaches its adult size. So that doesn't mean that it's actually done developing or it's stopped its a development. It's just done growing physically, if that makes sense. This is when kids start to hang out with other friends. It's when they start going, maybe they go out to the park by themselves. They're also getting really good at controlling their motor functions, like riding bikes, running, playing basketball, and things like that. They also have mostly like one-on-one friendships or maybe group friendships that are typically same-sex friendships. And that's what's going on from the ages 6 to 11. In adolescence, 12 to 18, it's actually a time of massive cognitive changes. That's when we start to explore really abstract concepts like love and fear, freedom, and things like that. We also sometimes struggle with feeling invulnerable or impervious to harm or something, and it's because although we have concepts of of love, fear, death, and things like that, those concepts haven't been cemented too tightly in our brains yet. So there's also we go from mostly a tight knit group of same sex friendships. We start to look for where we fit in our society or within our community, and so a lot of the times we'll start getting into mixed sex peer groups. We'll be very susceptible to peer pressure because we're looking for friends, for people who are like us. We want to be like other people and things like that. There's also a lot of stress involving new responsibilities, which could be academic or dating or driving or even taking on part-time job and things like that. Those are the two human developmental stages that we're going to focus on while we go on to our next slide. Focusing on those two developmental stages, physically in the brain, what's happening in the adolescent brain is that the hippocampus is developing at massive intervals. That means that during the adolescent years, teens are establishing how they're going to regulate their mood and their memory. The hippocampus is in charge of mood and memory. It develops during the adolescent years. And so that's how teens sort of like respond and grow and engage with the outside world. So knowing that, and knowing about THC and CBD and all those other substances, there has been substantial evidence from animal research and a growing number of actual human research that indicate that marijuana exposure during developmental stages can cause long-term or possibly even permanent adverse changes in the brain. Rats exposed to THC before birth, soon after birth, or during adolescence show notable problems with specific learning and memory tests later on in life. Cognitive impairments in adults or rats exposed to THC during adolescence are associated with structural and functional changes in the hippocampus. Studies in rats also show that adolescent exposure to THC is associated with an altered reward system, increasing the likelihood that an animal will self-administer other substances when given the opportunity. So really quick, that doesn't mean that these animals will for sure 100% turn to other substances. It just means that it makes them more likely to turn to other substances. We'll talk a little bit more about that in another few slides, but I just wanted to clarify that some of the controversy of marijuana being a gateway drug, it sort of gives off the notion that for sure, if you use marijuana, you will go on to use other substances. However, that doesn't seem to be the case, but it does increase the likelihood of other experimentation with other drugs. So it's not a definite yes, it's just the chances do increase. Juan, you can go on ahead and go on to the next slide.
And now we're going to have Claudia that's going to introduce a little bit more what Julian was explaining with the hippocampus, how the brain gets affected.
So Julian did talk a lot about the human developmental stages, and he did mention that marijuana does have an impact on the developing brain. But what does that look like? If you look at this image, you'll see what a PET scan of a brain looks like from a non-cannabis user to a long-term cannabis user. If you look at the left side, you'll see the blue pigmentation. And the blue pigmentation represents brain activity. And if you pay close attention, you'll see that there's more blue than green, which represents a healthy brain, and it represents that the brain activity is flowing as it should. If you look at the right side, you'll see that the green takes over the blue pigmentation. And that might mean that the person might have issues or might have a lag in brain activity. Or as people may call it, it might take a little bit longer for the brain to get going. And if you look at the orange pigmentation, that looks kind of like holes. So ideally, they kind of represent what a hole would be in the brain. So it's not literally a hole, but it does represent the gaps and the effects that marijuana has had on that developing brain. Moving along, we do have Juan, who will be covering marijuana and the different ways that it can be consumed.
All right, thank you, Claudia. And just piggyback it a little bit from what Claudia was talking about through our residential backgrounds with me, Julian, and Stephen, and Claudia's, we were able to see those actual effects in the youth. You know, when we would ask the question, hey, what age did they start consuming? Some of them would say 10, 11-year-olds. And they were 15 by the time they entered residential, but they acted like they were 10, 11-year-olds. So it kind of stops the progression of their brain development, just like Julian was talking about. So moving on, consumption. So we're gonna explain a little bit of the most popular ways that we've seen out there in the consumption sector. So smoking being the more, you could say, traditional way in the consumption of marijuana. Oil concentrates it's the issue right now, and including dabbing. Dabbing and wax pens are highly concentrated oils in wax pens, for example, that have been found in the youth. And these wax pens look like little USB devices. Some are kind of like they look like pens, like literally like a ballpoint pen. And all they have is a little battery inside. And these batteries, they pull the electrical current, heats up these coils. There's a little reservoir for the oil. When these oils are burnt, consumed like aerosols, they don't give the traditional smell that a marijuana would give, like if it's being burnt. Now, the other factor with these wax pens is also that their potency, because they're being, most of them, so if it's found in the hands of the youth, of course, they're already illicit for some way or another. They're not legally acquired. And some of the chemicals that we're going to explain later on with cross-contamination, they have been found to be laced with other materials. So, and then we're going to touch base on marijuana edibles. And in this form factor, it's they're very dangerous because the marijuana is hidden in dosages in these foods, and you cannot quantify. You cannot see how much marijuana it has. Individuals that, for example, have been using wax pens or have used or smoking, usually they feel the effects almost instantly, a couple minutes per se. But when individuals use marijuana edibles, these effects take longer, and that's because our metabolic rates are all different. Some individuals process food quicker, some of us process food slower. And what happens is the individual keeps consuming. Let's say, for example, in this case, it's a brownie, and they're trying to get high off the brownie. And the individual's like, hey, I'm not feeling it, so I probably need more. And they start intaking more. And what happens is they'll get this rush that can turn into it's not an overdose, it would be considered a poisoning of marijuana in an individual. And side effects would include, for example, anxiety, confusion, and we have seen mental health disorders that have been associated with edibles, psychosis, because sometimes the amount and the potency that the marijuana that they were using, it's not really quantified. You can't really say, hey, this edible has really high quality marijuana because of the whole testing and the state laws and federal. There's not really labs that will put their name when individuals send these items to test. So a lot of these tests are made, you could say, in-house or labs that per se only test to a certain amount of dispensaries, but not, you could say, a certification on a federal level. So edibles are very dangerous. Like I said, the contents are hidden. You cannot see them, and individuals want to feel the high. They're not going to feel it instantly. It takes longer, and they keep consuming and consuming.
Also, just really quick, when marijuana is smoked, it's delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol. And when it's eaten, when it's consumed like orally, it gets processed through your liver, and it's actually 11 hydroxy tetrahydrocannabinol. So what that means is that 11 hydroxy THC is a lot more psychoactive, and that's why THC poisoning happens when you eat it through your mouth. It's because that substance is a lot more psychoactive than if you would have just smoked it and inhaled it like that. So that's what's going on as well. It's that the metabolism might be slower. So when you eat one edible, it might hit you in 20 or 30 minutes, but during that time, maybe you ate another one or two. And if you did that, then when all of those doses take effect, then the individual will go through what's called THC poisoning, but not necessarily a THC overdose. And it's just dangerous, more of what kind of behaviors that individual can engage in. Maybe they run off, or maybe they're panicking. That's where the danger lies in consuming marijuana in that form.
Thank you, Julian. And then I'm gonna explain a little bit more on cross contamination. There has been cases where marijuana that has been tested by the federal government through seizures, in essence, has been laced with PCP, and these actually give very wide, diverse side effects, including like hallucinations, impaired coordination, disorientation, paranoia, and seizures. Fentanyl also being maybe equipment that was being used before prior to laced accidentally has been found in some of these wax pens that are produced illicitly. Another weird one that comes about through testing is E. coli. E. coli is a bacterium that's commonly found in intestines of warm-blooded organisms like ourselves, in small quantities, of course. So we usually hear E. coli when large batches of produce have been contaminated. And it's usually because you have, like, for example, animal feces or human contamination. And on some of these large batches that the federal government has seized, they have tested positive in high quantities for E. coli. And that would create a real issue if that was consumed by humans, infection rates and stuff. So there are different cross-contamination factors. One could be laced, and all the others could be at the production areas where they're not up to standards to be producing human consumption quantities of this product. So moving on, we're going to introduce a little bit more on the gateway drug.
So we've heard about the different ways to consume marijuana, and we've also heard about cross-contamination and the potential risks that can come from that. But now let's discuss marijuana as what they call it, the gateway drug. So the concept of marijuana actually being a gateway drug truthfully generates a lot of disagreement. The CDC did report that most people who do use marijuana don't go on to using other harder drugs. It is important to know that people of any age, sex, or economic status can become addicted to marijuana. But I do want to mention that even though the CDC has mentioned that most people who use marijuana don't go on to using harder drugs, some individuals who do experiment with marijuana may have a higher possibility of experimenting with other substances. So this next slide really covers the factors that affect the likelihood of somebody using marijuana and other substances. So one of the factors is mental health. Your mental health and your overall well-being really does have an impact on whether or not you will use substances. When talking about family history plays a key element. It has been revealed that the environment you grow in does have a very big impact on the person that you turn out to be. So this doesn't necessarily correlate that if your parents are drug addicts, you're going to be a drug addict. No, it doesn't mean that. But it does mean that growing up in a certain environment like that might increase your chances of the likelihood of using marijuana or other substances. The next factor is peer pressure. So this is a big one, along with the youth and pretty much anybody, because I know that there are adults, teenagers, and youth members who find it difficult to say no. And that's why we always cover peer pressure, because it can be a factor that can really represent whether you use a substance or whether you don't use a substance. Another factor can be loneliness, social isolation, and boredom. So typically it has been found that people who feel lonely or have social isolation do have an increased chance of engaging in substance use. And I do want to mention boredom. We have done studies in where students and youth members or community members have talked about boredom being one of the triggering factors towards using or engaging in substance use. And that's why it's always important to just make sure you're staying busy, make sure you're being involved, and making sure that you're tying in with the people around you and you're having communications and you're not becoming lonely or socially isolated. Another key factor is drug availability. Now with the legalization of marijuana, it's become a substance that is so abundant and so available, and that can be a very big impacting factor towards the likelihood of somebody using. It is important to note that just because something becomes legal doesn't make it okay to engage in that substance use. The last factor that I do want to talk about today is the socioeconomic status. So this plays a key role and increases the likelihood of somebody engaging in marijuana or substance use. So socioeconomic status, this means that, let's say you have two communities, and this community has low poverty, it's in a bad area, there's a higher abundancy of drugs, and you compare it to maybe a nicer community. There might be a lower abundancy of drugs, there might be better resources, there might be more activities for youth or community members to be involved. That can really have an impacting factor on the likelihood of somebody using. In this next slide, I do want to take the time to cover the possible health effects of marijuana. So I did briefly cover addiction in a previous slide, but I want to go more in depth in terms of the statistical numbers. So 1 in 10 of marijuana users will become addicted to marijuana. And 1 in 6 of people who actually begin using before the age of 18 will become addicted. And if you pay close attention to that number, you'll notice that if you're somebody who uses marijuana prior to the age of 18, your chances of becoming addicted do increase. In regards to mental health and marijuana can cause disorientation and sometimes can cause unpleasant thoughts or feelings of anxiety and paranoia. When we talk about lung health and marijuana can harm lung tissues and cause scarring and damage to the small blood vessels in your body. So it has been proven that the smoke from marijuana contains many of the same toxins, irritants, and carcinogens as tobacco smoke, which ultimately do have an effect on your pulmonary system. It's also been noted that after quitting, there is an increased risk for bronchitis, cough, and phlegm production. When we talk about heart health and marijuana does increase your heartbeat and can lead to increased risks of stroke and heart disease. This is because marijuana delivers harmful substances to users that are harmful to your cardiovascular system that can end up affecting your heart health. Next, we're going to talk about poisoning. So edibles, food, and drink products that are infused with marijuana can have a greater risk for poisoning due to the longer lasting effects and higher THC levels. So when I talk about poisoning, I am not saying that somebody is going to overdose from marijuana. No. So there actually hasn't been any confirmed cases of individuals overdosing from marijuana. But when I talk about poisoning, I'm talking about the overconsumption of THC that can lead an individual in an emergency room from consuming too much THC. The last segment I'm going to be covering today is brain health. So marijuana affects parts of the brain, as previously mentioned. Just to summarize the parts that are affected by the brain, due to marijuana use. It covers memory, learning, attention, decision making, coordination, emotions, and reaction time. So, all of those factors can be affected from marijuana use. And long term use can have serious effects to brain development, as we previously stated, and as I previously showed the slide representing the PET brain scan.
All right, so now we're going to introduce the Proposition 64, a little bit more on the political side and the zoning of it. Go ahead, Steve.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Steven, and I will be going over Proposition 64. So the first slide, we're going to be going over what it basically allows adults ages 21 years or older. So it does allow them to possess and use marijuana for recreational purposes. It also allows them possession of up to 28 grams of marijuana, and this would be considered in the bud form or the plant form. It also allows them possession of up to 8 grams of concentrated cannabis, as well as cultivation of up to 6 marijuana plants. I do want to point out, though, it does state that it has to be out of public view. So there are zoning laws behind that. It's not saying that you can just grow these plants and have them in your front yard, or if you have a little garden in your front yard, you can have these plants growing there. There are zoning laws behind it, so they do have to be out of public view. Proposition 64 also allows businesses the commercial and cultivation, distribution, processing, and sale of recreational marijuana and products by licensed businesses. So I do want to emphasize the licensed businesses portion. We do, I believe in the San Fernando Valley, at least I've seen dispensaries that have gone up illegally, and it does take some time, but they are taken down because of the most of the time it's the community getting involved. I know I've seen some next to different type of centers that provide services to families. I've seen them next to or close to schools or parks, and these are things that are not allowed by a license or not allowed by the county. So the community most of the time gets involved, and they notify the proper authorities, and these dispensaries end up getting shut down. The difference between a license and unlicensed, well, it's basically they're breaking the law at that point. When for example, when you drive a vehicle, everyone knows that you need to have a driver's license. If you don't have a driver's license, then if you get pulled over, there's the potential of getting a ticket, getting your car impounded for not driving or driving without a license. So essentially, running a dispensary without a license, it's essentially almost the same thing. It's illegal. Their standards aren't being met that are set by the county or set by the state. So we definitely want to emphasize that these things are only allowed for licensed businesses. And moving along, we will be talking about marijuana size comparisons. So if you look to your left, there's a picture of marijuana buds, and these are the legal quantities that are allowed by Proposition 64. So to the top left, you will see what's considered a gram of a marijuana bud, which essentially is one bud. To the right of that, you'll see what's considered an eighth or 3.5 grams, which is roughly 3 to 4 buds, and moving all the way down to 1 ounce, which is 28 grams. And these are the legal quantities that are allowed by Proposition 64. To your right-hand side, you'll see 3 individual pictures of marijuana concentrate. So these are the legal quantities of marijuana concentrate that are allowed basically by Proposition 64. And this is going back to what my colleague Juan talked about as far as the dabbing and all of that. This is what's used when they dab. So these are the legal quantities and some images. That way you can get familiarized with what they look like. So we can move along, Juan, to the next slide. So Proposition 64. So there are also things that it doesn't allow you to do. So it does not allow individuals the consumption of marijuana or possession of an open container while driving a vehicle, boat, airplane, anything basically that you have to uh, drive in or move around in. It's not allowed. So even for a passenger to have an open container, it's still illegal. And if they get pulled over, then there could be legal repercussions. It also does not allow minors under 21 years of age in possession of marijuana. So if there are any parents or providers or anyone on this presentation, this is kind of where I know a lot of working with adolescents in our residential program, our outpatient program. The topic that's always brought up is, well, marijuana is legal. Marijuana is legal. Marijuana is legal. That's what they always kind of tell us. But here it's important to educate yourself with Proposition 64, because this is the one where we let them know, hey, have you heard of Proposition 64? Yeah, this is what's legalizing it, but here are the guidelines. Minors under 21 years of age in possession of marijuana, it does not allow that. So that's kind of where you can take this information and educate them and let them know, hey, these are guidelines that are set by Proposition 64. It also does not allow adults in possession of more than 1 ounce. So again, if you're driving or walking and for some reason the police officer stops you and they check you and you're in possession of more than 1 ounce, which is 28 grams, then there could be legal repercussions for that. Also, this is one of the big ones. It does not allow adults from smoking or ingesting marijuana or marijuana products in any public place. Any place basically where smoking tobacco is prohibited. So this is important as well. If you live in an apartment complex or a townhome complex, anywhere basically where there's like common areas, like it could be your walkway, your patio area, your hallway. It could be like a park area. I know my community has like a playground area for kids. It also has like a dog park area. All of these places are considered common areas or public places where smoking marijuana is prohibited. Another big one that most people don't know is like parks. Say you take your child or your niece, nephew, or someone, basically you're at the park and you smell marijuana, then there are ways to go about it where you can have the proper authorities involved. And that could be like a park representative, just letting them know like, hey, that person is smoking marijuana. Proposition 64 states that, marijuana smoking is prohibited in all public places. So it's important to know Proposition 64. I do want to emphasize, though, just because Proposition 64 allows individuals to have possession of marijuana, we're in no way stating that it's okay to do these things. We are just educating on the facts on what it is. We did go over like the side effects, the different things that it can do to your brain development and all of that. So moving along, we will be discussing the zoning. So I know when Proposition 64 unveiled itself, a lot of individuals were upset. Why? Because it was basically the legalization of recreational marijuana use, and they wanted to know what the county was going to do. So one of the biggest questions was, what is the county going to do to address the legalization of recreational marijuana use? So the County of Los Angeles, they established the Office of Marijuana Management. It's basically there to implement the marijuana policies and protect the public safety. So one of the public safety, I'll talk to you guys about that in a bit. But the county also designed it to where a legal cannabis business must obtain a license both from the state and the local jurisdiction. So basically the state and the county or city that it's operating in. The state defaults are 600 feet distance between a licensed cannabis business and schools, but the county, LA County, uh, their distance is 1,000 foot radius, and this goes for libraries, religious places, childcare facilities, boys and girls clubs, YMCA's, any place basically where an adolescent is practicing some sort of activity. Proposition 64 also prohibits the marketing and advertising of marijuana to minors near schools or youth centers. It also allows the cities and counties to decide whether to allow the businesses to operate or not. So essentially, they approve the licenses or not. One of the biggest things is the county, and I think the communities. We can speak on behalf of the communities. They didn't want to see any marijuana billboards or any marijuana promotional signage near schools to promote marijuana use and to promote flavors or dispensaries. So this is one of the things that Proposition 64 prohibits. Next slide, Juan. So with that being said, that was our presentation for today. Those were some of the references that where we got some of our information from. We can go ahead and email that to you if you'd like. But I did want to talk about the Phoenix House Services. So these are the programs that we have currently operating right now at Phoenix House. We are offering outpatient services. Lolita Otley is the program coordinator for that program. It is a substance abuse treatment. They do provide fun, interactive groups, counseling services, therapy services. They're very interactive with the youth because we understand right now with COVID-19, a lot of things are happening. The youth, they're bored at home, things like that. And unfortunately, although we're not able to have them in our facility, we still engage with them via Zoom, over the phone, things like that. So if anyone needs outpatient substance abuse treatment services, go ahead and reach out to us. We can connect you with Lolita as she is in charge of that program. We also offer outpatient mental health services. Anyone needing mental health services, um, we can go ahead and connect you with Jenny Sanchez. She is in charge of that program. They're basically therapy. You know, they're providing therapeutic services to teens, to children, to young adults. So if anyone out there needs any outpatient mental health treatment, go ahead and reach out to us. We can definitely connect you with Jenny Sanchez. And we also have the wraparound program. With that one, you would need a DCFS or a probation referral, but we can definitely connect you with our director, Nelly Mesa, if you have any questions in reference to the wraparound program. And we are also offering MAT services. If you have any questions in reference to MAT services, or if you need MAT services, please go ahead and contact us at 818-686-3000. We would be more than happy to answer any questions, point you the right direction. That way we can help you out. And our next slide will be our contact information. So at the top left is Sarah Green, our program coordinator. She's currently overseeing the Your contract as well as the prevention team. We have to the right Morgan Wallace. She's our clinical trainer. Juan Jimenez, Julian Olmos, Claudia Buenrostro, and Stephen Flamenco as the outreach specialist or prevention specialist. Go ahead and contact us if you guys have any questions. If you would like us to present to you, you can go ahead and contact Sarah Green, our program coordinator. And I encourage you guys to follow us on Facebook and Instagram, where we're doing more presentations. We're doing more just overall like awareness in our communities, posting stuff on social media. So I encourage you guys to just give us a quick glance, a follow. That way we can inform you guys and keep you guys informed on the current drug trends. And I think at this point, we're going to open it up to any questions or anything, if anyone has any comments or questions.